Hello. In this video, we're going to look at random numbers and conditionals. Now, conditionals will be used in pretty much the rest of our code, all of our projects from here on out. But at first, we're just going to look at very simple uses of conditionals because we only know how to do a few things, basically how to animate something. So first, let's bring back that animation technique. We're going to make our setup function and choose the size of the window like 800, 600. And then we're going to do our draw function, which says, how do you draw each frame? And we'll do a background command of white and an ellipse command, or we're going to need a variable, right? Because we're going to need to say the ellipse is at x, y, and that's changing over time. And then it'll be 50-50, I guess. And if you want it to animate, in other words, to move, X and Y need to change each frame. So let's make them go up. Now you see it's underlying X and Y because I've used them, but I've not defined what they are. And as we saw last time, you don't want to define them here. And this is how you would define them. Say it's an integer, int X, int Y. You don't want to do it here, even though it's happy. It's willing to do this, no underlines. You don't want to do it here because every time the next frame gets drawn, X and Y get reset to 0. And so it's not going to move anywhere. We need to move this definition outside, let's say at the very top. And I don't need to indent them anymore, so I'm going to backspace that. You create them once for the entire program at the top here, and then refer to them later. And now, since you're not resetting their values every frame, they're going to increase every frame. So they get larger and larger. So the ellipse moves by virtue of X and Y increasing over time. Let's see that. Oh, sorry, the window's on the other screen. There, it's moving. And what you're going to see is it's going to go off screen. That's because X eventually gets larger than 800 and Y gets larger than 600. So maybe now it's at 900 and 700, and maybe now it's 1,800 and so forth. It's just growing, 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 but you're not seeing anything drawn on the screen because of the XY coordinates are too large. Let's stop this. If you want to know what those XY coordinates are, you can show them on the screen down here, this black area, by using a print command. Print ln, you're going to want print line, print ln, so that it goes to the next line after each print. Let's print X and print ln Y. Because it's going to be about 60 frames a second, you're going to see at the bottom a lot of messages, but that's okay. No, I can't move this for some reason. All right, well, anyway, let's run it. There are the numbers. Okay, let's stop it. I can't really tell which values are X and Y, so I'm going to slightly change this to put some text in here. I'll say X equals X, comma Y equals Y. So what I've done is I put a message in quotes. It just prints it exactly as is. You won't see the quotes, but it'll just say X equal. And then I stop the quotes and I want to mix in the actual value of X. So here I don't use quotes because I want it to actually give me the number. If I use quotes, I'll just see the letter X again. And then I want to go back to quotes for Y. So if you're going to mix phrases, or we call these strings, with numbers or variables, you have to start and stop the string and then plus whatever you want, plus go back to the string, stop it again, plus whatever. So this would be much easier to read in the bottom screen here. So those are our X and Y values. And eventually we see when they're large enough, the ellipse is off screen. So at about that point, 600, 650 or so on Y. Now we can use a conditional to say, if you go off screen, start back at the top left. The way we do that is, a conditional is an if. Say if, parens, and then you say what kind of question you're asking about. And in this case, I could probably get away with just saying if x is bigger than 600, I think it was, then we need to start it back at the top. So we write that as x greater than 600, close parens, braces. If that's true, we do something in the braces here. We can do lots of stuff in here. We can put multiple lines of code. It doesn't have to be just one thing, but in this case, I think, actually, I will need two things. I want to start x back at the original value, which is 0, and I want to start y at the original value, which was 0. So it's two different steps. I want to say x goes back to 0 and y goes back to 0. So it's resetting the values. That means the next time around, the next frame, they're back at 0 and the ellipse will be at 0, 0. And then these will change to 1, 1, and so forth. So this way we'll see the ellipse start back and just loop around over and over. Notice I don't need to say anything about y in this case because I just observed that I don't need to. You don't have to refer to every variable, it's just the ones that you want to ask about. So let's see what happens. So far the if does nothing because x is not greater than 600, so it's false. But once it is greater than 600, it pops back at the top left. To make it slightly smoother, first I'm going to increase the speed so we don't have to wait so long. Let's go by 5s. Okay, so it's flying past there and then it pops back. With this fast speed, it's actually kind of hard to tell now, but it kind of jumps back a little too soon. And I want it really to jump back off screen. So we could do that with setting the original values to negative, like 50 and negative 50. So the first time it's drawn, it's up and to the left. And then reset to the same place. All right, so it starts a little up and to the left, and I'll probably want to go a little further so it goes completely off screen. All right, so it's just aesthetic differences, not a big deal. All right, so that's a simple conditional. We're going to get a lot more complicated ones later, but it's a good way to start, just how to put something back at a certain position if it goes too far one direction or the other. Alternatives, not in this particular program, but another program you might say less than. If you want to say greater or equal, if you believe x could be exactly 650 for some reason, you want to check on that too. You can do greater or equal as one operation, or less than or equal. And then there's a very interesting case of to check if x is the same as 650, not greater, not less, but exactly 650. You don't use single equals because for one thing, it's complaining, which is nice. Single equals is to change what x is. It's to give x a new value. You don't intend to do that here. You just want to ask a question. So we use double equals to ask a question. It's a little bit weird looking, but since they use equal sign to change the value of a variable, you can't use equal in this situation because this is asking a question. Is x equal to 650? Normally with numbers like this, you don't want to use double equals because it is not likely that it's going to be exactly 650. Like in our case it will be negative 50. You're adding 5 each time. Eventually you get to 650. Suppose you change this to be slightly slower. You're adding 4 each time. It's never going to equal 650. It skips over it. So you would be better off doing something like this. Yep, still works. Okay. The other thing we want to look at fast is random numbers. And what we can do in this case is start it at a random place. Let's say random, let's say negative 50 to 100. In other words, give me a range. Choose a random number between negative 50 and 100. Now it's going to choose a float. If you remember the last video, float are decimal numbers, like 10.2. And we're using integers for x and y, so you have to force it back into an integer. So basically, it chops off the decimal point if you do this. you put the random function inside of the int function. Negative 50, comma 100. All right, so it's going to start, maybe we'll do negative 100. So we're for sure it's off screen, but we're not exactly sure how much off screen. And then we're not necessarily going to add 4. We're going to add, each time we run the program, we want to add a different amount, different speed basically. So let's say dx, or how much to add on the x, is going to be also int random. And if we want to support going left or right, we'll say negative 10 to 10, and dy negative 10 to 10. So it might go up, down, left, or right, frankly. I don't want it to go up, because then I'll have to mess around with these. So let's say between 1 and 10, it's going to go down, but you're not sure how fast. And then x could be it's going left or right, you're not sure. So in this, the starting x position, let's not say that, let's say all the way up to 850. So the x position could be anywhere along the top of the screen. The y position is somewhere in the negative on the top of the screen. And it's going to go dx, it's going to go left or right, you're not sure. But it's going to go down for sure, but you don't know how fast. So let's add dx and dy instead of 4. And everything else looks okay, except this we probably want to reset to a random position just like before. I'm going to copy this part, put it here, and copy this part, put it here. It's going to reset in the same way. So if you go off screen, restart yourself in a random place, but it's not going to change what dx and dy are. So every time we run the program, it's going to fall the same way, same direction, same speed, but every time it goes off screen, it's going to reset itself. And since x could be going left or right, if you go off screen to the right, this happens, but if you go off screen to the left, it doesn't do anything, which would be like x less than 0. So we're going to put a and x less than 0, or not and, I mean or. It can't be both greater and less than. So or, if x is greater than 650, you're off screen, or if x is less than 0, you're off screen. Maybe we'll do negative 50. So it can go off screen for 50 pixels, and then this triggers. So if you go off screen to the right, or you go off screen to the left. Before I had and, that's a mistake. You can't have a number that's greater than 650 and less than negative 50. There's no such number. So this would never be true. So that's a mistake. Or is what we want in this case. The fact that this is or is just, it's been that way for 40 years in computer science. So it probably could be written or, but we don't in this language. And that vertical bar thing is above the enter key, and you have to do shift. And of course, ampersand is above the 7. So, or. Okay, let's see what happens. Going down that way, and you see it's keeping the same direction and speed, but it's resetting at random places. And if I restart the program, it'll be a different direction and speed. The same direction it seems, but it's random. That could happen. And it still resets. Let's try it again. And that's the way it's that time. Oh, it's resetting too soon. That's because the x coordinate is really 800 across. And I put 650 because x and y were increasing at the same speed before, but now they're not necessarily. So we're going to go back to 850 here. And that should cover it. Goes completely off screen and resets itself at a random position at the top. Each time I run it, it'll be a different speed and direction. Right, so that's random numbers, and that's conditionals. Just to review real fast, random is a function where you can give lower and upper bounds. And every time this function happens, you probably get something different. And in this case, since I've got everything up here, it's going to be different each time I start the program. Random gives you back a float, also known as a decimal value, and our x and y and dx and dy are integers, not floats, so we have to force it back into an integer. And we use the dx and dy to add to the x and y coordinates, so that gives us kind of a random direction and speed, direction left to right, and speed vertical. Then we use a conditional to say if the x coordinate is off screen. So off screen really means too far to the right or too far to the left. To check both cases. If you're too far to the right, that's this case. Or if you're too far to the left, that's that case. And if that's true, you're off screen. You need to restart your position in a random x coordinate, but always off screen in the y coordinate, above the screen in the y coordinate. Okay, we're going to use random numbers sometimes, depending on what we're doing, but we're certainly going to use conditionals pretty much for every program here on out.